During the Second World War, the Nazis were looking for ways to increase the efficiency of their concentration camps, and they came up with something diabolical. Heinrich Himmler, one of the main Nazis in Germany, ordered soldiers to create brothels in 10 concentration camps under the guise of voluntary applications. But here's the thing, it wasn't really voluntary at all. The Nazis deliberately humiliated prisoners by making them serve as prostitutes. Yeah, you heard that right. But the level of brutality was way scarier. If you want to know about the real horror, stick to the end of the video and don't miss the ending. With that said, let's start. Margaret, a survivor of the concentration camps, wrote about her experience in her memoirs. She was one of only 16 women who were forced into serving men in the SS concentration camp system. Can you imagine being taken away from your family and forced into such a degrading and demoralizing position? It's a topic that has been hushed up for a long time, but we need to talk about it. These women were not doing this out of their own free will. The Nazis wanted to increase the productivity of their slaves, and they thought that this was the way to do it. They promised adequate nutrition, regular medical examinations, and protection from abuse. But let's be real, those were just empty promises. The SS personnel in charge of the brothels were specialists in this matter, and they recruited women who were suspected of being prostitutes before their arrest or had engaged in sexual relations with prisoners sent to forced labor. It's sickening, really. And while participating in this saved their lives, many still died in Nazi concentration camps. It's hard to imagine the horrors that these women had to endure, being used and abused by the very people who were supposed to protect them. The aesthetic aspect was not the most important to the SS in their heinous plan to increase productivity in concentration camps during World War II. No, what mattered most to them was that women were healthy and able-bodied. These poor souls were taken to special buildings in the camps, designed with a corridor running through the center, leading to rooms with women. The rooms were simply equipped, lacking any sort of comfort or humanity. And can you believe that even the prisoners who wanted to visit these so-called brothels had to undergo a medical examination? It was all to prevent the spread of sexually transmitted diseases. The Nazis claimed that the right to go to a brothel was a privilege, but what kind of privilege was it really? According to historian Robert Sommer, only about 1% of the concentration camp prisoners were allowed to visit the brothels, and they were typically working prisoners belonging to the upper echelon of the camp hierarchy. It was supposed to be a reward for good work, but the reality was far more sinister. The prisoners who were allowed to visit the brothels were forced to undergo thorough medical examinations to ensure they were healthy enough for the experience, and excess people could constantly observe what was happening through a viewing hole in the door. This was all part of the Nazis' insidious strategy to deliberately humiliate and degrade prisoners. And the topic of false prostitution in concentration camps has been hushed up for a long time. It's sickening to think that women were recruited on a supposedly voluntary basis to serve as prostitutes for other concentration camp prisoners, all in the name of increasing productivity. True voluntariness in the conditions of the concentration camp was out of the question, as the SS created an inhumane system from which the women were supposedly protected. The Nazis were not satisfied with simply imprisoning innocent people during World War II. They had to find new ways to humiliate and degrade them. One of their twisted strategies was to establish brothels in the concentration camps. But here's the kicker. The soldiers who went to these brothels had to pay 2 stamps for the privilege, which many prisoners simply couldn't afford. But it gets worse. The women who worked in these brothels were forced into sexual exploitation. They were prisoners themselves, victims of the Nazis' inhumane treatment. And although the topic of false prostitution in concentration camps was discovered shortly after the fall of the Third Reich, it was swept under the rug and kept hidden for years. No one wanted to talk about it or acknowledge the suffering of these women. It wasn't until the early 90s that some brave survivors, like Margaret, were willing to speak out about their experiences. They were afraid to be seen as willing participants in this horrific system, but they knew it was important to shed the light on the truth. Sadly, the survivors have never received the recognition or compensation they deserve. In fact, only one known case of a victim filing for compensation was rejected on the grounds that the statute of limitations had expired. The fate of these women show just how far the Nazis were willing to go to insult, humiliate, and mocked their prisoners. But at least 3 survivors were successful in one thing: surviving. And that brings us to the end of the video. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. See you in the next one. Until then, peace.